Welcome back to another episode of the Max Term Podcast. Kyle Stitch here, flying solo for this week. Just going to bring you a short episode, kind of preparing you so you understand how arbitration works. We've done a couple episodes in the past, but figured it would be a good opportunity to refresh this as cases will be starting to be heard next week. It would have been today, but Capo Caco has already agreed to a new contract with the Seattle Kraken. So first case will be early next week. So it's a perfect time to kind of discuss how the process works, how it impacts the teams that go through the process, the players, and all that. So appreciate you listening. Max Stern Podcast available on all major podcast platforms. Our content, including our contract projections, are available on X at AFP Analytics. Same handle as well on Threads and Blue Sky. And we also in our link tree have buy me a coffee if you've appreciated our work through the off season and would like to give us a financial contribution. We appreciate that. And at the end of the off season, we're going to take 10% of those contributions and donate them to Rochester Emergency Veterinary Service, which is the only kind of after hours care in the greater Rochester area for pets and their families. So NHL arbitration is not the most enjoyable process, which is why over the years you see less and less cases actually heard and settled. So as I kind of started my cold open there, the first case was scheduled to be Capo Caco versus the Seattle Kraken, and that was supposed to be July 25th. They had agreed to a new 4.53 AAV contract, and that was signed earlier this week, July 22nd, officially. And this remains an option for all players up until their hearing starts. So the first hearing is currently scheduled to be Arvid Soderblom with the Chicago Blackhawks. So he has basically the weekend to agree to a new contract with the Chicago Blackhawks. And it can be basically 1 year, it can be 8 years, it can be any contract that the two sides find fair. But the minute they walk into that hearing on July 28th, I don't know exactly what time it is, but they would have up until the time they walk into the room to sign a new contract. However, once they start making their arguments, and I'll discuss a little bit more about that in a few minutes, they have to accept the arbitrator's award. And this applies to all the players that are still scheduled for our arbitration. So Soderblom, Maxim Siplikov with the Islanders is scheduled on July 29th. Dylan Sandberg with the Jets, July 30th. Connor Timmins with the Sabres on August 2nd. And then on August 3rd, both Nick Robertson with the Leafs and Jaden Struble with the Montreal Canadiens are scheduled to have their hearings as well. So most of these players, this is going to be very relevant for. Most likely only one of the players that are going to be going to arbitration will potentially get an award over $4.85 million, whether that's on a 1 year or 2 year contract. That number is super relevant because the minute that they basically get that an award under that amount, they are locked in with their team. The only way a team cannot honor an arbitration award for this season is if it was over $4.85 million. So I would expect Dylan Sandberg, he should come in above that, but maybe not super far above that on a short term, like a 1 year contract. But this is why some teams would hesitate to qualify a player and allow them to file for arbitration. So I know right around the start of free agency, Jacob Bernard Docker from the Sabres did not get a qualifying offer from the team. And I think fans were a little bit confused. I was a little bit confused as well, because in limited minutes with Owen Power, he seemed like he was a quality player. But the team was very concerned about getting an uncomfortable arbitration award for him because he did play very well in those minutes. He would have had a pretty strong argument to present, and it would not have been over 4.85 million. So they would have ended up having to pay him probably, just say, maybe around $2 to $3 million, and they didn't feel that that was worth it. So he's just one example, but that's sometimes why teams will not issue qualifying offers if they're afraid of the arbitration award, because there's no walk away for kind of the quality bottom half of your lineup type players, because those are all going to come in under that 4.85 ceiling. So how does the process work? So we've already got past the both players and teams have the opportunity to file for arbitration. So the teams first, then the players, then the teams basically get a rebuttal. We did see 3 teams use that rebuttal this year. The reason those teams used that opportunity was to prevent an offer sheet from coming in while they put the final details on the contract. Probably the most notable example of that was Bo Byram with the Buffalo Sabres. Whichever side has elected for the arbitration allows the opposing side to set the term of the award. And the term of the award can be 1 year or 2 years. In most situations, the teams are setting the awards because the players are the ones who have elected for arbitration. So almost every single award we're going to see this year will probably be a 1-year award, because the teams would rather not get locked into kind of a longer term contract. In this situation, let the player prove their worth, and then if they do so, pay them next year. Who knows, maybe there is 1 or 2 that are a little bit more interesting. I could see Toronto maybe doing that with Nick Robertson, someone who hasn't had the opportunity to kind of get a full-time role yet, but in limited opportunities has proven to be an effective player, and maybe betting that he's a little bit of a late bloomer. There's definitely show signs of progress there. So we'll see what happens there, but most of the time teams will elect for a 1-year arbitration award to be able to kind of reevaluate again next offseason, give themselves more flexibility. So that sets the term length. And then both sides, the player side, which will include the player, their agent, and representatives from the Players Association, will create an argument as to why they deserve a certain salary. And then the team will also create an argument for why they believe a player deserves a different salary. The player, of course, will always ask for more, and the team will always ask to pay the player less. And they will both build their arguments based off of recent contracts that have been signed for similar level, similar type, contract type, that is, players. So these are going to be players that are arbitration eligible, probably got 1-2 year contracts. Whether or not they went to arbitration or not is not 100% relevant, but the preference would be, of course, given to players who did receive arbitration awards. So that would be kind of the top priority if teams or the player side, the agents, are trying to come up with who they're going to present for an argument. They're first going to look at which contracts have been recently signed, giving preference to those that were arbitration eligible or arbitration awards or arbitration settlements. So if a player was about to go in the hearing and agreed to like a 2-year contract, that would be incredibly relevant for for an argument here. And then they're going to look at the statistical profile as well as some other factors, but usually those other factors are things like awards or even just like pedigree and stuff. It's usually not. So, long way of getting to, it's usually not looking at the kind of advanced metrics, the analytics, the whatever you want to call it. So, there's probably over the years, there's probably a little bit more seeping in of analytics like shot suppression, shot quality, shot quantity, stuff along those lines on off the ice. But traditionally, teams and agents have stuck to box score statistics and role on the team as well as other factors. So, for example, if Connor Timmins ends up going to arbitration against the Buffalo Sabres, that would be a very bad idea for the team because they gave up a valuable asset to acquire him this offseason. So that's going to be the player's first argument is, hey, Buffalo values me very highly because they gave up a second round pick for me. That's going to be relevant. They're also going to present his stats and everything like that, but it's going to be awfully hard to kind of get around that argument. It's hard to say no, a player is not worthwhile after you just gave up a very high draft pick to acquire that player. Yes, I know there are other components to the deal and everything, but I'm sure the players' camp will present that as kind of their argument. Meanwhile, the team's main objective in these situations is to tear down the player as much as possible. So they're going to present arguments that are going to make the player feel like, why do you even want me on your team again? And then as soon as the hearing's over, they'll come out and say all these great things about the player in the press to try to kind of cover up how that arbitration hearing went. So basically you have two sides who are getting incredibly heated and one side who's going to by nature make it personal. That's the team's going to make it personal against the player. It's not that they don't necessarily want the player, but they want to present an argument to not have to pay the player quite as much money. So oftentimes what happens with these type of situations is both sides leave feeling a little bit hurt, but the player especially, sometimes the relationship is never going to be the same. And a lot of times you end up seeing within a couple years of an arbitration hearing going through that the player ends up traded or walks in free agency, one of the two. But a lot of times what will end up happening is they will get the arbitration award. I shouldn't say settle, get the arbitration award and then sign a long-term contract in the next offseason or at some point shortly thereafter. But the damage has kind of already been done. So I think the most famous example of this so far playing out is PK Subban with the Montreal Canadiens many years ago. He was at the time one of the best defensemen in the National Hockey League. And the Montreal Canadiens went in to the arbitration hearing and made it personal, attacked his character, attacked all these other things to try to get the lowest award possible. And that clearly stung Subban, and conversely, the player side attacked the team, and that did not help the matter either. So they got an award, and then they ultimately did also sign. Subban ended up signing a long-term contract with the organization, but he was late. Just a couple years later, famously traded 1-for-1 for Shea Weber, and that had been probably boiling since the minute that arbitration hearing ended. First off, it's a business, so players and teams are going to do what's best for the business, their own business. Subban wants to get his money. He wants to secure his contract, so he's going to sign that contract. The Canadiens can't afford to risk losing one of the, at the time, best defensemen in the league for nothing. So they want to give him a long-term contract. But there was just no coming back fully from how that arbitration hearing went. More recently, we also kind of got a glimpse into that with Jeremy Swayman and the Boston Bruins. So 2 off seasons ago, I think I'm counting back correctly. So last offseason he signed his massive long-term extension. The offseason before that he had went to arbitration. And he had flat out came out after the hearing and said he felt hurt. And he was very good the season after the arbitration. I think there was a little bit of chip on his shoulder that he wanted to prove the team wrong for what they had said. He also still had the opportunity to kind of form a tandem with Linus Ullmark, so there was a little less pressure on him, as well as him having that chip on the shoulder. So he came out and had a great season. But last offseason, neither side filed for arbitration because they did not want to go through the process again. Neither side did, because there were feelings that were hurt. But it was still talked about, it was still acknowledged by him that impacted how he felt in the long-term contract negotiations. He was not in a mood to kind of bend over for the team and accept something less than he felt that he was worth. And obviously that negotiation dragged out a while, all the way into the start of training camp. And everyone, I think, would agree Swayman was not the Swayman of old this year. He did not play up to his standards, his expectations. There could be a couple reasons there. There could be the fact that he is now the unquestioned starter, and with that comes a little bit more pressure. Could be he got a late start to his training, and that messed up his rhythm. Could be there's still some mental anguish from that whole arbitration thing. So I know James has said it on episodes before, not full on serious, but kind of throwing it out there as an idea of, will he be traded before the end of his contract is up? One of the ideas I think James was kind of pitching is sending Swayman, is Boston sending Swayman to Columbus for a young center, impact center. I think Kent Johnston was kind of one of the names that he had focused on. And I can't sit here and I didn't at the time disagree with James's assessment, and I can't sit here now and say that assessment's wrong. So teams, players do try to avoid arbitration. Where usually it plays out is some of the lesser known players, lower level players, who are looking to secure not necessarily more money in the NHL, but potentially a better award. So if they are sent to the minors, they have a better contract to stand on, or get a few more dollars in the NHL is not going to upset them either. So running back through the names that are arbitration eligible. So Soderblom with the Blackhawks. That one I'm expecting maybe does go to arbitration. The Blackhawks acquired Spencer Knight in the offseason, so they're They're probably not as committed to Soderblom at this point. His stats have not been great at the NHL level. So they might try to squeeze him a little bit there, and also are probably not overly concerned with damaging the long-term relationship there. Maxim Siplikov with the Islanders. This is one I would be surprised if it did end up in arbitration. He was very good in his only season in North America. And that feels like a player that the Islanders would probably want to build around longer term. And arbitration, especially for someone who was in the KHL for a while and probably would be okay returning there, going into that and kind of bashing that player, that just doesn't feel like a good strategy. Again, especially because of he was good for them last year. Very solid middle six kind of winger. There's some upside still there. Dylan Sandberg with the Jets. This one has to get done before arbitration. The Jets would be in a very, very tough spot if they did not get this done before that arbitration hearing, because he would basically end up walking to unrestricted free agency, and the team would have absolutely no leverage. Oh, and by the way, Dylan Sandberg was really, really good last year for the Jets. So they absolutely need to get this contract done. I think where it does get tough is a lot of Sandberg's value comes in the analytics, if you will, not necessarily the box score statistics. So if it did end up in arbitration, it could get ugly. It really could. He's probably worth $5-6 million pretty easily on a long-term contract. But if the Jets are trying to squeeze a little bit of cap space, this would be an opportunity to do so for them. Again, I would strongly advise them not to, because this is a long-term relationship you want to have. You don't want to damage this. So we'll see what happens there. But this, to me, that one feels like another one that has to get done. Connor Timmins with the Sabres, I kind of used him as an example early on. I would be surprised if it went for the sole fact that Buffalo gave up the valuable asset for him. I don't know if they need to worry about the long-term relationship. I just think that the team would have a very hard time presenting a case against Timmins, considering he was not on their team last year, and they, again, gave up a valuable asset to acquire him. Nick Robertson, I could see going either way. It would make sense if the Leafs do try to give him a little bit more of a long-term commitment, but I also wouldn't be shocked if they do go the arbitration route, keep the salary as low as possible, because that relationship for a couple of years has already seemed a little bit rocky. So we'll see what happens there. But I don't know if the Leafs are overly concerned with damaging a long-term relationship there, because both parties might already not even see it anyways. And Jaden Struble, Canadians, I think kind of the same thing. I lean a little more Montreal would probably be not want to go the arbitration route, but if they ended up there, I don't think it's the end of the world for them. He's a very nice kind of depth defenseman that has shown plenty of signs. He's another one where the analytics probably play better than the actual box score numbers for him. So he would probably have a tough time getting an award. So maybe the team goes to try to squeeze him a little bit, but that one to me is kind of like a toss up. So the arbitration hearing happens, and then the judge will, or the arbitrator, I should say, will have a couple days to go through the arguments and then issue a salary ruling. He can award any salary within basically the parameters that have been set by the player's ask and the team's offer. Usually, what we see is the team will offer something incredibly low, the player will ask for something incredibly high, and then the arbitrator will settle, will basically split the difference in the middle, which will be where most of the logical comparable players come in, anyways. It really doesn't make a ton of sense that they go through this entire process and then the arbitrator just picks the midpoint, anyways. Every so often, you'll see things maybe break a little bit of tradition, but they get the award and they are locked into the team with that contract unless it comes in again over that walk away threshold, which I laid out earlier, being 4.85 million. And again, outside of Sandberg, I don't think anyone's going to get there. So all the players are going to be locked in. The other reason that teams like to keep the like to have one arbitration case kind of on the books is it does afford them another buyout opportunity immediately after the case is that they either settle with the player before the hearing or the award is given. Get 48 hours to have another buyout window, basically. So if there's someone on in their organization that they are wanting to move on for whatever reason, did not want to do it early, right after the Stanley Cup before the offseason opened. Maybe they want to see if they could secure a player via free agency or trade. This now gives them the opportunity. So sometimes teams and players at like, again, almost AHL level players will have an arbitration hearing set, and there might be a little bit of like a nudge nudge wink wink kind of agreement here that, hey, we'll take care of you, but we want to have this arbitration on the books so we can have that second buyout window. And I mean, it's not hurting, if as long as they don't go and absolutely trash the player, it's not really hurting the player if they get awarded a little bit more a little bit later in the offseason. So that's one of the kind of key aspects. So this year, I can't necessarily, looking at the teams that'd be eligible to choose another buyout window. The Blackhawks have already taken care of business. The Islanders and Jets, maybe, depending on how things shake out. Sabres should not need to use another buyout. I don't know who would even make sense to do for that. Toronto, maybe. Montreal, probably not. Maybe, though. Seattle has already had their opportunity passed because that contract's already been signed, and we've already passed the kind of time of the 48-hour window afterwards. So I think that gives a pretty good overview of kind of the arbitration process. If you're kind of taking away just a couple things. First, it's most of these players, if they do end up going to arbitration, going to be one, locked into the award, and two, it gets ugly, and sometimes that long-term relationship is damaged because of that. So if your team does take a player to arbitration that you're hoping to have around for a while, that's not necessarily going to be the case. History has shown traditionally that is not the case, and I would expect that to continue, especially with kind of who the names are that this offseason. If you have any questions, feel free on X at AFP Analytics. My personal handle can also easily be found through there. We're also on Blue Sky. Threads. Questions, usually easiest place to ask, are on X. Appreciate you listening. Max Term Podcast available on all major podcast platforms. If you appreciate our content throughout the off season, we appreciate any monetary contributions you're willing to make. Buy me a coffee. It can be found in our link tree. It's pinned to part of all of our profiles on those platforms. And again, at the end of the off season, we're going to take 10% of your contributions and donate it to Rochester Emergency Veterinary Service. Next week, we should be back to our regularly scheduled content, but just we both kind of need a little off-season decompression. So decided to do a short episode this week for you. We appreciate you listening, and we'll talk to you next time.